All right, good afternoon, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting. In attendance today, we have, of course, myself, the chair of the committee representing the 4th District, Councilman Burnett representing the 8th District, Councilman Cohen representing the 1st District, Councilman Costello representing the 11th District, Councilwoman Porter representing the 10th District, and I don't see Councilman Glover, or I see Councilwoman Ramos representing the 14th District. All right, and I don't see any other council members on the line. From the Office of the President, I know Nikki Thompson's on the line. Matt Stegman, are you on? And Aaron DeGraff, right? All right, and representing the Mayor's Office, do I have Natasha Mihu on the line? And Nina Themelis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Nina. All right, this afternoon, the committee will have a hearing for Bill 21-0094, Public Safety Apprenticeship Program Establishment, the Hometown Heroes Act, for the purpose of providing for the establishment and implementation of a public safety apprenticeship program for Baltimore City, providing for the development and oversight of the program by the Baltimore City Fire Department in partnership with certain other public safety agencies in Baltimore City, establishing the purposes of the program, and requiring that the Baltimore City Fire Department report annually certain information to the Mayor and City Council, and requiring the report to be made available on the department's website. This bill was introduced on June 8th, 2021, and it was sponsored by Councilmember Chris Burnett. Councilman Burnett, the floor is yours.
My colleagues.
There you go, Councilman. You were muted for a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that. So I'm trying to get my notes together. 1 second. Okay, here we go. All right, so we've heard this one a few times, and to remind colleagues, this bill. Okay, here we go. All right, I'm ready. Sorry, trying to find everything I need to talk about it because we have a lot of amendments. So I wanted to be able to walk through them effectively.
All right. Good. Take a moment if you need it.
Oh no, we're good. We're good. I got everything I need in front of me. Okay, so just a reminder: this bill establishes a public safety apprenticeship program that would operate out of the Baltimore City Fire Department, Baltimore City Police Department, and OEM in partnership with Baltimore City Schools. It would create a pipeline, a formally established pipeline, workforce development pipeline into these amazing public safety careers, so that all of these departments are reflective of the city of Baltimore, so that we're creating legitimate opportunities for our young people, of which this council has many times vocalized the need for more workforce training programs and pathways for young people into well-paying careers. And I firmly believe that careers in public safety are a path that we should be pushing our young people towards. Today, I thought it would just be helpful for us to walk through and consider amendments, of which the committee should have all of them, all 21. And these amendments are a reflection of conversations that have been had both in the committee hearing process and in conversations with Baltimore Fire, the Mayor's Office, Police Department, Law Department, and City Schools. And so if you'd like, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to just go through them. Most of them are very technical. Some of them are a little bit more nuanced.
Yes, let's do that.
I guess if Sam could pull it up, so. All right. All right, so first, page 1, line 7, that is a technical amendment that would extend out the effective date, or provide for the effective date in the in the for the bill. Sorry, I'm again 21 bills. I'm trying to figure out where I'm at. Yes, it provides the effective date for that. Again, very technical. A lot of the page 2, striking line 5 in the bill. Again, a technical request that came in from the law department related to a residency requirement that was listed in the bill. Which the law department has stood up many times that we can't have those type of provisions in the bill in our efforts. So that was a reflection of their commentary in their bill report. And I don't know, I saw Elena pop up. I don't know if is this good in reflecting what you guys were concerned about, at least for that provision?
Elena, you muted.
Or we can come back if she's having some technical problems.
I think we just move on.
Okay. Yeah, if there's any issues, but that was from the law department. Amendment number 3 is reflective of conversation we've had with the fire department around staffing the program. And so it removes out a minimum requirement or stated minimum requirement of personnel to be assigned, uniform and non-uniform personnel to be assigned, and basically gives a little bit more flexibility from a very specific allocation of staff to something that would be reasonable to accommodate the needs of the program. Page 4. Two through 4. Okay. Again, public safety. So this one, number 3 strikes, I'm sorry, number 4 on page 4, line 2 through 4, replaces and adds a little bit more clarity on the needs of each agency. Sorry, I'm trying to turn that sound off. Each agency to develop and implement their sort of own elements of the program and takes out the very specific language that was sort of being interpreted as placing the fire department as the agency entirely in charge of the program, where it's supposed to be more of a partnership model. And so we took that feedback and included it. Page 4, striking line 21. Again, this was from the fire department. There were language in there around minimum grades and stuff like that, where we, again, trying to increase the level of flexibility for young people in the program. Okay, page 4, lines 24 through 25. Okay, yeah, yours looks a little different than mine, so I'm gonna stop looking at the screen because it's throwing me off a little bit, it's totally fine. So because I have more of the sort of broader language in front of me, so that's why I'm a little bit thrown off. There was also a provision in here that was pulled from another bill and slipped through the cracks. When we talked about eligibility for the program, there was another program that this was modeled off of that had a citizenship requirement. Obviously, we're not in favor of that, did not catch it in the bill draft. So this is removing that requirement out. We want to make sure that we are keeping this program open to all Baltimoreans, regardless of their immigration status or where they came from. That is not reflective of what we stand for in the city, and it was an oversight in the drafting of the bill. And so pulling that out so that we make sure that this is as inclusive as possible. Amendment number 5. Okay. Yeah, amendment number 5. Yeah. So number 5 is again from the fire department. It strikes the attendance requirement in the program, particularly with everything that's been happening with the pandemic. Having a minimum number of days in the program may be a challenge for some young people, and so the fire department recommended that they make their own sort of determination of qualifying participation. So again, just giving more flexibility to folks in the program, young people in the program. Again, also removing the residency requirements and approval from a parent or guardian is, again, we want to, young people come from different circumstances. So trying to make sure that we are being, again, as inclusive as possible. Amendment number 6. All right. Again, page 6, lines 11 through 14 came from law department. Again, removing out the listed residency requirements there. There were also provisions being removed on this page, returning that flexibility to each agency in the development and implementation of their elements of the program. The modules included in that. The sponsor page 6, 19 to 20. Thank you, Sam. Okay. Okay. All right. So sorry. Again, amendment number 6. Again, substitutes, takes out the number of years that they have to be enrolled in a particular school. It also removes some of the required hiring provisions and returns, again, a lot of that flexibility back to the agency. Though there are, we did leave in minimum hiring requirements for this, which would be outlined on page 7. The amendment number 7 strikes out mandated benefit packages and returns that requirement back to the Board of Estimates. And I believe that one would have come from the law department in all likelihood. I don't have that one in my notes as from where it originated, but that would have been either from HR or law department on that one. All right. Sorry, 1 second now. Trying to make sure. Yeah, sorry. And 7 strikes out a lot of, again, the minimum benefits and returns all of that back to HR and the BOE. Okay. Similarly, amendment number 8 corrects minimum participation recommendations in the program. Sorry, some of these are duplicated and are throwing me off, but are just listed in different parts of the bill. And amendment number 9 gives the enactment date of January 1, 2023. I'm sorry I stumbled through that. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll open the floor to questions if folks have any for Councilman Burnett. All right, seeing no questions, we can move forward. And as I understand, Councilman Burnett, we're not going to vote on the amendments or the bill today. There's one holdup that we still need to work out with the agencies, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that when we go through the agency reports. So now we'll hear from the agencies, starting first with the fire department.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. Kim Washington on behalf of the fire department. We stand by our original report. We are happy to see some of our recommendations are a part of Councilman Burnett's recommended amendments to this bill. We are available for any questions. We still have an issue with the number of cadets that we have to, that are sort of mandated as a shall or must in the bill, that we would like to make that a may instead. I think it's 25 for us, 25 for the police department. So we would like to see a little bit more flexibility in that. And with the changes, we feel like we can move forward. I would like Chief Shiloh to make an announcement if she is on here. Chief Shiloh.
Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know if I've done it in this forum, but we were officially approved by the State Department of Labor as an agency that was approved for the Maryland Apprenticeship Program. So we are starting to move forward with that, put that together, and hopefully we can roll that first cohort out this summer.
And so with that announcement, we feel positive moving forward that we will be able to touch more Baltimore City students through this program. So that's the extent of my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kim. I'm curious, how does that fit into this program should it come into play? What does that mean?
The Maryland Apprenticeship Program is a paid apprenticeship. It's 450 hours, and it would start in the summer after 10th grade. It's kind of like a longer Youth Works, where Youth Works is only 5 weeks. This would be the entire summer for both their 10th grade and 11th grade. It has to be completed before they graduate high school. So it would familiarize them with our department, all areas of our department, not just fire or EMS. There's the fire marshals, all of our different divisions of our department. And then after their 11th grade, we would teach them emergency medical responder, CPR, and in hopes of bringing them in as community aides once they graduate.
That's great. Congratulations. We'll actually move through all of the committee reports from the agencies and then open up the floor to questions. Should council members have questions about feedback, especially with regards to the community's responses to the amendments. Next, we are going to move on to the police department.
Good morning. Actually, it's afternoon. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Michelle Wurtzberger, Director of Government Affairs for the Baltimore Police Department. We're in a similar boat, and we share similar concerns with the fire department. First of all, we stand by our report. We are very grateful that the Councilman Burnett has agreed to adopt or push forward some of these amendments. The one amendment that we think still needs to be considered is adjusting the mandated number of cadets that need to be hired by each agency. And from the police's perspective, you all saw our announcement regarding the release of the GTTF report. The very, very first recommendation in that report addresses hiring standards and mentions how the urgency to hire more police officers may have led to the reduction of hiring standards or, looking the other way. And we are very concerned that codifying a number in law could cause future administrations to reduce their hiring standards. This administration, Commissioner Harrison's administration, has safeguards in place. We don't think that would necessarily impact us, but we are very determined to make sure that we have things in place to make sure that there's no GTTF or similar situations in the future. We do have some proposed language that we'd be happy to share with the sponsor or the committee to help move along those that information or that process. I can also point the committee and the sponsor to the page in the report that mentions that particular hiring information. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Michelle. Next up, we've got the Law Department.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Elena DePietro from the City Law Department. Sorry about my technical issues there. I couldn't get the mute button off before. But the big problems that the Law Department had with this bill were the residency requirements, because state law does prohibit local jurisdictions from having residency requirements for certain categories of employees, and these positions would fall into those categories. Secondly, we had an issue with the original bill had a lot of HR related requirements, like setting salaries and benefits and all that sort of thing. And that since that is chartered by the charter, the province of the HR department, it was outside the scope of what the city council could legislate on. But fortunately, we were able to come to a agreement on that with the sponsor, and the amendments clear up those issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Elena. So are we prepared to approve it for formal legal sufficiency?
Yes, we would be able to, should these amendments be adopted.
Awesome. Thank you. Next up, we've got the Department of Finance.
Good afternoon, Mara James, Legislative and Engagement Lead for the Department of Finance. We've reviewed the amendments. We have some concerns about the way that this now would separate out the programs to each individual agency and added possible burden. While the fire department and police department currently have programs that align with this, we couldn't be concerned about possible additional needs for staff. However, also the other agency, OEM, while they have an internship program, don't necessarily have the explorers for something similar for younger individuals or a cadet level. So there'd be additional requirements for that office, which would require additional staffing likely to meet the program requirements. So we would just like some clarity, I guess, on that need and how that would work with the programs. Again, we stand by our initial report around concerns of course, staffing and increased costs there. Some of the amendments address this in terms of personnel requirements being struck and specific mandates around compensation. But we would just raise again that the agents, a lot of fire and police already have programs that do some of this. And as Chief Shiloh just mentioned, there's the new apprenticeship program. So this work is being done by our agencies. And so just concerns about additional work and additional staffing to add to that. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. Next up, we've got the Office of Emergency Management. I don't know if we have representation from OEM.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Malidi, Deputy Director from OEM. We do stand behind our report and stand ready to support whatever decision is made. However, we do echo the same concerns that have already been identified. We're a very small shop and operate on a very lean budget. So those are definitely concerns for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we've got the Baltimore City Public School System.
Good afternoon. My name is Kamasi Vines from Baltimore City Public Schools, Director of Career Readiness. We stand by our previously submitted report, and we are looking forward to working with the agencies to bring these opportunities for our students. As Chief Shiloh mentioned, we have the mechanism or the model through the apprenticeship program already in public schools, and we're just looking forward to partnering with the agencies as much as possible to make some great things happen for the young folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamasi. And last but not least, we have the Department of Human Resources.
Hi, Joanne Ashton, Chief of HR Shared Services and Recruitment for Department of Human Resources. We definitely continue to stand by our responses, which were definitely around the civil service rules and some of the mandates that Ms. Ruley spoke about, and also the number that need to be hired for the programs. We are here in partnership to continue to work with the city agencies and the school system to make this a great program for the students and for the city.
Thank you, Joanne. All right, I will open up the floor to questions from the committee and the sponsor if you have questions of the agency. Councilman Burnett.
So it's not so much a question per se, but I just wanted to respectfully push back on a couple of the items stated. One, starting with the police department, and happy to continue the conversation on this, but the bill would require the hiring of 25 students. And while I do understand the concerns with that, I would note that the school system has 80,000 students in it. And so surely I think in a pool that large, and noting that the cadets would be in the program for 2.5 years prior to that phase, the agencies would all have ample opportunity to assess their character, work performance, the type of people that are coming through these programs, and ample time to vet them before they would be coming into the force itself. And I just find it hard to believe that, in a pool that large of young people, finding 25 qualified students per year shouldn't be that particularly difficult in that way. Again, happy to have conversations offline about how we can sort of meet halfway on this, but I just would push back that, we've heard time and time again around officer shortages, difficulties in recruitment, and how, staffing challenges at the local level. So, a mandate of 25 young people, I don't think is going to rise to the level of what was described in the GTTF report around, a rush to hire young people who would have been familiar with the agency, familiar with the hiring staff, with the department for 2.5 years prior to that phase. And so I just wanted to push back on that notion that may create a challenge for the agency. And just wanted to also broadly remind folks that I'm glad to hear that there are existing programs, but none of them are codified. And I think that has been the challenge with this pipeline into public safety careers, is that as the police department stated, that, when there are protections put in place, things put in place by commissioner, that's great. But if they aren't codified into the code, then a transition in leadership means that priorities change. And so with this particular program, I've talked to folks in the fire department and other agencies that have actually come through these types of programs, and they all have, fond memories of them, but also in every single conversation noted that there were ebbs and flows in the prioritization of this over time. And so without there being a codified pipeline, we are at the whim of whoever's in charge of it. And do they want to prioritize creating pipelines for young people to get in the field of public safety? And so I would just remind folks that that is what the intent is not to try and duplicate a program, is to try and make sure that there is a sustainable sustaining of this program. This isn't new. We've had a cadet program in each of these agencies minus OEM for a significant amount of time, but the quality, the outcomes have been documented. And you know, I'm glad to see Kamasi on here because I know that this is something that they're trying to work out, even at the school system level. In that, because there hasn't been a prioritization and real focused effort over time, these programs aren't really creating actual pathways for young people. Most of them aren't coming out into careers. They come out with certificates that they don't use largely. And so there's an effort at the school system level to fix that and create that pipeline. But I would argue that one of the ways to ensure that we aren't back in where we are right now, where it's well documented that these pipelines aren't producing the outcomes that they should, that codifying it and creating a level of stability for the programs is that important first step in ensuring that regardless of when a young person comes through, that they're getting that same quality, that same level of priority. There's obviously a second bill related to this around funding it as well that we hope would create that stability and that long-term pipeline so that the fire department, police department, and OEM are fields that young people are going into. And we look back, you know, years from now, we'll see a force or an increase in a force of, you know, fire and police officers that are from Baltimore, that are from the communities that we all say have been disinvested for so long. And so that codification is important. Around the concerns about staffing, again, I'm happy to have additional conversations around that. But I would argue that if these agencies minus OEM are already operating programs, happy to add additional, you know, the amendments that we included don't require a minimum. We had a minimum amount of staffing required to operating. We're taking that out. So if the staffing is available to run an apprenticeship program already, I'm not sure how this creates an additional burden for folks that are already doing this work. It is just not codified. So just again, respectfully, those are my feedback on that, and would remind the committee that the staffing minimums are now pulled out. And so it does return the flexibility, or should the committee approve it, would be pulling out the staffing minimums on the agency side. So the concerns around the increased burden, I would argue should the committee adopt that amendment, would be lessened. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Burnett. I have a question for finance with regard to exactly that point. For the additional expenses that we are concerned about, was it primarily around those points, those additional positions that were initially mandated, or is there much more?
So initially, that was our concern. When we got these amendments just earlier this week, I believe, with the 3-day weekend, apologies, when we got them. But then it became the question of, the staffing had initially been centered in fire, and then for the program, and then split out to each agency coming up with their own programs and curriculums, thinking about OEM not having these programs already in place and needing to establish that could be on top of any possible additional staff needing to hear from fire and BPD about possible additional staff needed if there are changes to their programs that would need to be made to meet the requirements of this bill.
Got it. So the concern is that even if we don't require initially those positions anymore, it leaves OEM without the capacity to actually execute the program.
Without adding staff, yes.
Got it. And then my second question is with regard to the 25 cadet minimum. I know that's been an issue brought up by both fire and BPD. I was curious, through this program, does this by any way guarantee a cadet a slot in the BPD or in the fire department.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
That was a question.
Oh, okay. So for BPD, cadets have to go through a number of testing requirements just to be a cadet. And then once they finish that program, they have to go through additional testing. So it's not a mandatory pass through just because you finish the cadet program, you are now a recruit that goes through the academy. That's really, really important for us.
Got it. Yeah, I'm sensitive to the concern that you guys are bringing up about GTTF and us not being discerning in our hiring. I also do appreciate the councilman's point that, you know, to choose 25 out of 80,000 students, there's a way. I don't know, maybe it's not as easy as we may think it is, and I'd love your insight on that. But there's definitely 25 students in the school system every year that would be interested in getting a foot into the fire department or the police department. It's a matter of how well we can do at finding those folks. And as far as making sure that we don't lower our standard for folks that eventually do join the force, it sounds like we still have a mechanism to ensure that we get the best of the best, that we get the high quality cadets, and we can work with them early enough such that they do have a chance to make it through the BPD hiring process. So I'm really curious, Michelle, you suggested some language. I'm curious how the language looks and how we're thinking about this thus far to make it a little bit more flexible, but also understanding, I think, there's some room here.
Yeah, I think so. I understand everything that you're saying. I understand what the sponsor's saying. The commissioner has a saying that hold on, I missed it. Quotas equal corruption. We don't want to mandate certain types of things. We don't want to mandate a certain number of people being pulled over. We don't want to mandate a certain number of arrests. This kind of falls in line with that. But what we get from this discussion is that we need to have transparency about what this process entails. We have to have an urgency, which certainly BPD has. We have been working so very hard to not only increase cadets, but increase our recruits. We have got to bring in more people. We have to bring in more Baltimoreans. And so what we think is that rather than put a number in the law, what we mandate is that there is either an annual, a quarterly, whatever is appropriate, reporting out to the council about what we have done. Figure out what that is, and we are happy to do that. We're already reporting out on a whole host of other metrics, but this allows us to feel that urgency. It mandates us to bring you into that process in a more kind of thoughtful way, and so that's kind of the language that I have put together.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. I think only the sponsor can sort of work through the details of that and understand if that's sufficient for what he's trying to accomplish here. I do think the key here is sort of putting some backbone into a program such that it does stand up and it's actually executed. And I think we certainly don't want to go through all this and have a program that only exists on paper because we didn't give it the sort of backbone to exist and to thoughtfully and thoroughly do something. So I'm not sure what that middle ground is. I'm not sure how to make that work. I do appreciate the commissioner's concern, and we're not voting on this today. I think that's a big part of the concern we need to figure out, but I'm really interested in seeing how that goes. With that, I see two hands up. I see Councilwoman Ramos and then Councilman Cohen right after.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilman Burnett, for continuing to make this work, because I just want to second your notion that we do want to make it work. We want it codified, and there is a pretty robust reporting section in the bill that I think we want to maybe you make more robust so that we get all those metrics. And I'd be happy to work with you. I did find a typo in one of the amendments in the reporting. Amendment 9, it just says on page and not which page. So I think it's supposed to be page 10. But also I think we want to make those reporting requirements a little bit more robust. If you're going to take out some of the mandates, put in the reporting. And so I agree with Director Wurzberger on that. And happy to work with you. But I agree with Councilman Burnett. I think it's important to codify this. We want this going on for a long time. And we want that accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the agencies assembled, to my colleagues. Having taught in Baltimore City schools, I would definitely concur that there are many, many young people who are interested in careers in public service, be it law enforcement, fire, et cetera. And I think it's incumbent on us to create those pathways, which I think is the intent of this legislation. And we do local hiring mandates all the time. I mean, we do that in contracts, we do that in bills that we write. And so, I want to first concur with my colleague that I think having it clear and mandated, and that this is not just the target, but this is what we are going to do, is critically important. And I guess it would also, I'm trying to understand, I completely get that quotas in the police department have become extremely problematic in a lot of ways in the past with writing tickets or making arrests. But I am trying to understand the connection with the gun trace task force, because I cannot get the leap. We're saying we want to hire, we want to create this pipeline, we want to create these opportunities for our young people in Baltimore. What's to make us think they'd be any more likely to turn corrupt than anybody else?
My apologies. I probably didn't explain it properly. So in the report that was released last week, there was a great deal of discussion about how we have got to make sure that our hiring standards are the same, regardless of what the pressure is to hire. So it's not necessarily that we're going to hire the kids and they're going to turn bad. It's that we may feel pressured to hire people more quickly and may have to hire people who shouldn't be hired because we may not have additional, the right number of qualified candidates. And what they've come to believe is that many of the officers who were a part of the GTTF should never have been hired to begin with, frankly. But that perhaps there was this pressure to get folks on the force, get bodies, and so they cut corners. And so that was the point of it.
Got it. Yeah. No, I totally understand that. Do not want us hiring folks who are going to end up endangering the lives of citizens in this city. However, I still fail to make the connection. I understand we don't want, or the department doesn't want, any increased pressure to have to make decisions quickly or limit their pool. But I just fundamentally think one of our values needs to be hiring from within our city, and particularly within our school system, and creating those pipelines. And so, I think it's really important to just stand on that principle. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Burnett.
So 2 things. One, I wanted to, I was sent a reminder from staff that to clarify that the OEM reference in this bill isn't to establish a full-on cadet-like program. It would be a 8 to 10 week internship program. And so just wanted to flag when we talk about staff capacity. I'm not saying that running an internship program doesn't require additional capacity, but wanted to flag that that particular pathway in the bill, which can be referenced on page 3, isn't as robust of a pipelining program as what's being asked of fire and police. And I would just second Councilmember Cohen's comments in that I obviously understand there being a push away from hiring people who are unqualified. I would note that the young people coming out of this program would probably be more qualified than your average applicant, having spent 2.5 years in a pipeline program that would be, have its own level of metrics, testing, et cetera. And so I think if we're talking about having high quality folks into the force, this is probably the way to do it. In that these folks, these young people, we're reaching them at a young age. We're giving them a path forward. I know I wish in high school, early in my high school career, I had a path forward or something that I could focus on. And I would note that I did go to enroll in a physical therapy training program, and it really did help me focus on a career path forward. It gave me that, and obviously not a physical therapist, but it gave me a path. It opened opportunities for me to get internships. I worked at Towson University, got into University of Maryland, got internships immediately there, and I had a resume that I could build on. And so would argue that while I think that there are a tremendous amount of lessons to be learned from the Gun Trace Task Force, I think that this is actually stepping in the opposite direction and saying that we are actually reaching further into the pool of people who are coming from Baltimore City, live in Baltimore City, invested in Baltimore City, and investing in a career in public safety and know what they want to do. And we're getting them early into that. So we just lift that up, that I do understand mandates, and will, again, to the committee, fully commit to continuing conversations with the police department on this. But just wanted to put that out there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee on this bill? Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, I want this to come across the wrong way, but I want to point out that, while I understand and appreciate the intent here, when you're running something as large as the police department, that it's a lot easier said than done. That, hey, we're going to provide a quota of X number of positions that need to be hired. I think we all have the same shared goals here to promote safer communities in Baltimore City. And we all want to see opportunities created for our young people, especially first and primarily those who live in Baltimore City, help give them opportunities, especially pathways to contribute and give back and serve our communities. But I do want to point out that this concept of a quota remains of deep concern to me, and I want to make sure that we are not hampering the department's ability to hire the right people in order to one, ensure that we have safe communities, and two, just as importantly, to ensure that we have compliance with the consent decree. It's just my 2 cents. I appreciate you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other comments, questions, otherwise from the committee? All right, we are going to put this bill in a recess. There's still some work we need to do, and Councilman Burnett, look forward to working with you on those 2 final pieces. And with that, we are going to move on to our next bill. The next bill is Bill LO 21-0015, Baltimore City Fire Department, EMS stat and operations, for the purpose of requesting the fire chief to present information to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee evaluating EMS data and operations. This bill is introduced on
Did we lose the chair, or is that me?
No, we lost him.
Okay. I was like, wait, is my computer? My computer sucks. So could have very well just been me.
All right. I'm sorry about that, guys. I got booted right in the middle of it. Where was I? So
I would say start from the beginning because you cut out almost immediately.
Oh, okay. No problem. All right. So we're going to start on Bill 21-0015 or LO 21-0015, Baltimore City Fire Department, EMS stat and operations, for the purpose of requesting the fire chief to present information to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee, evaluating EMS data and operations. This bill was introduced on October 4th, 2021, and it was sponsored by myself, Councilman Conway. Once again, this is really our opportunity. I really appreciated our first hearing on this, where we started to dive into what we were seeing operationally and some of the public health implications that sort of seeded some of the operational problems that we're seeing across the department. So really looking forward to jumping into that conversation. I understand the agency's got a presentation that we're going to walk through. I asked that we had an opportunity to review that presentation, and I'd like to, if we could focus on the first 8 slides before we open up for questions, because I think that's an apt opportunity for folks to understand the neighborhood and top 10 posts, top 10 box areas before we jump into the EMS call volume. With that, I'm going to hand off to the fire department.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. Council members, thank you as well. I have with me Chief Matz and our medical director, Dr. Ben Lawner, and they're going to outline the presentation. Chief Matz, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Could I be elevated to share the presentation, please? Oh, you did. Wait just 1 second. Can everyone see that okay? No?
No, we can't. Now it looks like it's coming up. There we go. Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you. Give me just 1 second here. Okay, Chairman Conway, members of the City Council, good afternoon. And for the record, my name is James Matz. I'm the Deputy Chief of EMS. I'm also joined today by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Lawner. Would you like to introduce yourself? I guess Dr. Lawner's not coming through.
No, I'm here.
Oh,
actually,
okay.
I'm parried about something, but I'm here, Chief Matt.
You can introduce yourself for the chair, for the record, sir.
Dr. Ben Lawner, one of the medical directors for the City Fire Department, with some pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Great. So I'm just going to go ahead and start through like we did the last time, just walk through the top neighborhoods. I guess you said you want to go through all 8 slides first, Chair, Mr. Chair, and then we'll stop and talk for questions, or you want to do it that way?
Yeah, if we can get through the box areas and then the top neighborhoods, I think it'll help give us a little context before we jump into questions.
Sure. So I'm just going to read for everyone's edification. Our top box in the last quarter, understand this is the last quarter of 2021, was box 3350. They had 345 incidents, and those neighborhoods within that box area encompass McElderry Park at 162 incidents, Milton Monfort at 113, followed by the Care, Patterson Place, Madison East End, and then Middle East. The next box area that had our top 10 areas was box area 51-1 that totaled 300 incidents. The neighborhoods within that box assignment, and I would like to point out some of the boxes do crisscross, so you'll see the names appear multiple times. Elwood Park and Monument at 203 incidents, Baltimore Highlands at 45 incidents, and then they were followed by Patterson Park neighborhood, Orangeville industrial area, and Madison East End. The next area in sequence would be box area 13-70, which encompassed 280 incidents in fourth quarter. And those neighborhoods in that area were Upton at 201 incidents, Druid Heights at 39, and then they were followed by Madison Park, and then Sandtown Winchester. The fourth highest number of EMS calls with box area 14-50 at 278 incidents. And that's Carrollton Ridge at 231, and then New Southwest Montclair at 47. Fifth would be box area, which is really Northwest Baltimore area, which would be 45-40, and that encompassed 254 incidents. And those neighborhoods were Levendale at 206, followed by Mount Washington at 44, and then Cold Spring with 4. The sixth box in sequence would be box area 23-1. They had 235 incidents in this box area, and those neighborhoods included downtown at 214 incidents, downtown west at 11 incidents, and then the Inner Harbor itself at 10. The seventh area with the highest number of EMS incidents would be box area 13-40, and that encompassed 230 incidents in those neighborhoods. Once again, seems similar to the other ones we did with 13, which is Upton at 198 incidents, Madison Park at 28, and then they were followed by Bolton Hill and then Heritage Crossing. The eighth would be box area 27-30, which included 230 incidents, and that neighborhood was just one neighborhood, and that would be Frankfurt. The last two neighborhoods, or last two box assignments, would be box area 13-10 at 226 incidents, and those neighborhoods were Bolton Hill at 143 incidents, Druid Heights, and then Madison Park. The last box assignments will be box area 6-62, which is really around the Old Town area, and that encompassed 225 incidents. And those neighborhoods included downtown at 138, and then Mount Vernon at 87. Trying to see what slide is that. You want me to go a little bit further in here, sir? Box 5. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's the slide after the map. We can stop after that.
Okay. So what we did on this is we laid over the information we had put down the first time when we did the entire fiscal year, and we laid down the Q4 numbers along with the fiscal year totals or incidents. And as you can see for the quarter, and to be honest with you, a lot of these numbers seem pretty consistent. At about a quarter of those numbers, downtown accounts for 1,211 calls, whereas for the whole fiscal year they did 4,822. Sandtown Winchester did 915 incidents during the quarter. Frankfurt accounted for 904, and for the entire fiscal year, they were at 3635. Bel Air Edison was at 788 incidents for the quarter. For the fiscal year, they were at 2932. Upton accounted for 766 incidents for the fourth quarter. Brooklyn accounted for 665 for the fourth quarter. Cherry Hill accounted for 530 for the fourth quarter. Carrollton Ridge at 442. Broadway East was at 433. And then finally, Coldstream, Homestead, Montebello was at 423. And then I'll pause at that point, Mr. Chair, as you asked.
Thank you, Chief Matz. The super interesting. I'm going to open the floor to questions. A bunch came to me as I was looking through this slideshow. So first, for the top 5 neighborhoods, do we have a sense for the common calls for service for these top 5 neighborhoods? What are we seeing?
The most common call that we go out on, and you'll see it later in the presentation, the top 5 most common are going to be our low acuity calls, which are predominantly for sick patients. The other, if you want to start getting a higher acuity, with a higher acuity rounds out as an unconscious or potential overdose, chest pain, or shortness of breath. They're the big ones. And there's all different breakdowns of how that works out, but that's the highest and the lowest as they break down.
What percentage, roughly, would you say of those calls are low acuity calls?
That I can answer right off the top of my head. For the entire fiscal year 21, we had 46,000 low acuity calls, which are roughly 30%.
Wow.
A third.
And do we know, on average, how many hours per day medic units are spending responding to low acuity calls?
I'd have to work that one out for you, Mr. Chair, to be honest with you. In terms of our unit hour utilization, our peak times really run from about 6 or 7 in the morning until about 1 a.m. We get a little bit of a lull for about 5 or 6 hours, and then things ratchet right up. I think between 6 and 7 is when it really climbs up. But you'll see that later when we do the unit hour utilization. You'll see an increase, especially with the resurgence of COVID. Those numbers are starting to climb.
Okay. I have a number of other questions, but I want to open the floor to the committee if folks have additional questions. Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are EMS calls, right? Yep, number of EMS incidents. Do we know what percentage of these are for anything opioid related?
The problem with opioid related calls, and it's one of the ones that, you know, we work with the opioid intervention teams and such with the health department. A lot of the questions they always say is, how can we get dual dispatch? The problem is overdoses don't come in as overdoses. Overdoses come in as everything except overdose. They come in as a person down, a man or a woman down, unconscious, unknown person, a person sleeping, possibly a shortness of breath or a sick. They don't come out as a straight overdose.
It's Chief Matz, right?
Yes, sir.
Chief,
Yes.
Is there any post recoding that occurs after the fact, just for the sake of, you know, working to keep accurate data?
Sure. So what we did is years ago, going all the way back to probably 2015 or 2016, a lot of the people were pushing to say, well, every time that we give naloxone or Narcan, it would be an opioid related call. The problem with that is a lot of our providers, and they do it all over the state, it's called prophylactic administration of Narcan or naloxone. So what happens is when somebody goes into cardiac arrest, regardless of whether they go into a cardiac arrest, they give them Narcan. It could be for a 90-year-old person in Levendale nursing home, and they'll give them a dose of Narcan. So what we arrived at to be able to narrow down and be able to identify those type of calls is we actually targeted when we give a Narcan administration when there was a response, because Narcan only works on patients that are under an opioid of some form. So what we do is we target a report at the end daily that comes out and tells us the number of overdoses we do. That number varies. It goes up in the summertime. In the summertime, it can go up from anywhere from 20 to 40 overdoses a day. At this time, it drops. You know, at this time of year, it's usually down between 10 and 20. But the number kind of goes like this, Councilman.
Is it possible to code them post-service as either definitely opioid, potentially opioid, or definitely not? Like, for example, if I, you know, am in a car accident and break my arm and there's no signs of opioid use, you could say that's definitely not an opioid one.
I could just.
I'm not trying to create. Let me preface, Mr. Or is it Chief Lawner or Mr. Lawner?
Ben Law. I'm a physician, but it's okay. I usually get hello and hey and whatever else in the emergency department. So thank you.
Who do you work for, Ben?
University of Maryland School of Medicine.
Oh, excellent. Outstanding institution. Thanks for everything you guys do. Let me take a step back real quick before you answer that, if I may. I don't want to create more work for anyone. I'm not in that business. I'm just curious if it's possible, if you thought about it, and whether you decided, hey, we looked at it, we thought makes sense, but we're not going to do it, and here's the reason why. That's all. I'm not pushing anyone to do it. I just want to be clear on that.
If I could just add a little bit of context here, and this is the challenge with it. As an emergency physician, you know, we want to encourage people to call, right, 911. And remember, the way we get these is that people contact 911. We have the way to code the call is the information that is received in a very short period of time. The challenge that we have, if you look nationally, about 30% of our calls are either lower acuity or opiate related. Opiate related doesn't necessarily mean that there's not something coexisting. And the granularity of the data is very difficult to pick out. In other words, we'll go to a cardiac arrest and the talk screen may show opiates. That may be a prescription medicine. That may be a co-ingestion. It may not have anything to do with the etiology of the arrest. So one of my biggest things, and that you'll see, is that we need to do a better job with dispatch. And there's no question that we can work harder to get the correct patient, the correct resources, the correct time. But it is very challenging on the initial side because there is a lot of over triage and inaccurate assumptions on behalf of not only EMS providers, but the general public. And unfortunately, the 911 system, until you get eyes on the patient, does not have the granularity to kind of distinguish. That comes on the back end with a CRIS report. It can be done, but that's going to require manual abstraction and looking at data from a variety of other hospitals, if that makes sense.
You're on mute, Councilman.
2 years into WebEx, you think I'd figure it out.
I want to say both.
Yeah, Chief Doc, thank you. Let me summarize it in my own words, and then you can let me know if I got it correctly, and then I'll yield my time to the chair. It sounds like you all have thought about how to more accurately classify EMS calls for service, especially with respect to opioid use. Unfortunately, there's not a way that is bulletproof to make sure it's 100% accurate, and there's probably a decent amount of guessing involved, and therefore it's not a worthwhile endeavor. Is that fair? Or it's not a worthwhile endeavor to go any further than what you're currently doing. Is that fair?
That's fair. We're working with health to try to make a little, more targeted response for that problem we have within the city, Councilman. But I think the way that we address the reporting and that we extract the data for the actual overdoses, that's about as accurate as I can find. I got to be honest with you. Most places around the state and the state of Maryland itself report strictly Narcan usage or naloxone usage, and it's flawed. They overinflate the numbers, without diving in. And the other problem is when somebody dies of a cardiac arrest, we never know if that was because of an opiate unless they had a needle or something nearby. Only the medical examiner can identify that. So I think we've identified what area we can target the best we can, and we do that. And that's one of those areas we're trying to work with Open Baltimore to be able to publish it by zip codes. One of the things that they had asked for us to work with.
Thank you, Chief. And Mr. Chair, if I can ask a 15-second follow-up to that, and then I'm done.
For it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I assume that there's very close and consistent coordination with our opioid overdose coordinator over at the health department, and that's daily interaction, right?
I wouldn't say daily, but I would say at least monthly or biweekly. They just one of our staffs just had the opioid fatality review committee yesterday. We meet monthly. I would say every other week probably I interact with Ms. Spencer, the opioid coordinator.
Any opportunities to increase the frequency of that communication with Ms. Spencer and her team? I know they're doing great work. Would be deeply appreciated, even if it's just for regular check-ins, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. I really appreciate you considering that request. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions? I'm curious, I'll throw one in there before we move on. I'm curious, have we considered any alternatives for low acuity patients? One of the things that the police department does, for instance, is that we've got wagons to transport people. Have we considered anything similar to that? Is that a possibility for low acuity patients that, for instance, twist their ankle and we have to respond, and we got 6 people in a van with twisted ankles? They can get to a hospital. When they get there, the ankle's not going to get hopefully not too much worse or better. But crazy idea from Councilman Conway.
You're stealing my thunder, Chairman. That's what we were going to go into a little bit later. You're stealing some of the thunder where we were trying to talk to. It's been identified throughout the state. It's a problem. We're trying to get into the weeds a little bit later when we go to the other half of this presentation. I was going to talk to you about some of the problems we're having with COVID-19's resurgence and some of the changes in posture that we have to do to be able to answer the call for service to the city of Baltimore. Well, hopefully I can answer those questions for you later, if that's okay.
That would be great. If there are no further questions, I'll let you guys continue. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, you guys can go on.
Great, thank you, sir. So a few more slides here about our calls and averages and such. What I'd like to point out that's really kind of interesting, if you look at the calls for service daily, weekly, and monthly, they fall in line between the fiscal year as well as the quarter. Daily on average, we get 427 for this quarter, 3,000 incidents for the week on average, whereas for the fiscal year it was at 2,997, which is really almost no difference. Monthly, we're averaging about 13,100, and on 21 it was at 12,987. I would point out, though, with the resurgence of COVID, we're starting to see a peak in a lot of those different things. Our peak call volumes are still the same as they were before. Between the hours of midnight, between the hours of 12 o'clock in the afternoon and 1758, or 59 hours, which is really 6 o'clock at night, is our busiest time, that 6-hour spread. Day of the week is Friday. Time of the month is the end of the month, it's most busy. And month of the quarter is December. It tends to be the most busy. We put the averages, laid them out between the fourth quarter of 2021, along with third quarter of 2021 and 2020's fourth quarter, to kind of be able to give it some, lay it against some apples and apples and oranges. Whereas we averaged 427 in the third quarter, it was at 457 of 2021, and it was at 398 in 2020 fourth quarter. Our weekly average are at 3,000 this year. 3,100 was what it was last quarter, and last year on the fourth quarter it was at 2,796. Bearing in mind we were at the peak of the COVID, and a lot of people weren't going to the hospital last year. I was, one of the weird outliers with COVID. And then monthly 13,000, and then at 12. Most frequently types of call for advanced life support for fourth quarter of 2021, the top 5 were difficulty speaking between breaths. Anything that's an 06 is a difficulty breathing. They have, a whole variety of different breakdowns, but essentially you're talking about difficulty breathing, which for the incidents in the quarter was 2,142. Overdoses or unconsciousness were at 917 for the fourth quarter, or that would be a 31, would be the identifier. Overdose change of color, 599. Chest pain with difficulty speaking was at 540. And then the last but not least would be problems breathing not alert, 532. While we were doing the earlier bill, I did identify, these are the top 5 highest acuity call for the last quarter. I identified the numbers that were fed in there were wrong, so I dropped them because they were way off. The numbers should have been, like for the 26 alpha 10, it should have come in about 2,000 calls, and the number was at 133, Mr. Chair. So I dropped those, and either later today or early tomorrow I'll have those emailed out so you get the exact numbers. But the combined numbers of those 5 should have came in between 5 and 10,000, and the total numbers weren't even 1,000. And instead of like skewing to that, I just dropped them while we were talking about the first bill. But the 26 card is by far our most common card, which is the sick card. There's a whole bunch of all different alternatives for that. 26 alpha 10 is unwell, ill. 26 alpha 11 is the vomiting card. 26 alpha 02 is the abnormal blood pressure. Sick is for 26 alpha 01. And the last one is 26A07, which is a new onset immobility. And just to kind of give you a little perspective on those numbers from the fiscal year, the 26 alpha 10 card, there was 5,174 calls for last year. So that number should have came in roughly about 1,000, but the numbers were way off. I just want to give you perspective. The 26 alpha 01 was at 2710 was the number for that. So I apologize for those shortfalls of those numbers, but I will email those either later today or early tomorrow. I'll have those out for everyone. Average time, I would like to talk about this for a second. The average time, EMS unit response time in the fourth quarter is up to 10 minutes, 22 seconds. The average medic time is 10 minutes and 19 seconds. And the AMBO average is up to 10:30. For the entire fiscal year, when we made this last report, our average was at 9 minutes and 51 seconds. That number is dramatically up, and I want to get into that a little bit later, but a lot of it has to do with the problems we're experiencing because of COVID. The suppression response time to EMS calls is still level at 6 minutes and 35 seconds. The average wait time for an EMS arrival is still at 15 minutes and 46 seconds. It's actually significantly up in FY21 as a whole. That number was at 8 minutes and 26 seconds. EMS fleet utilization, and I think this is a real marker. And if I was going to drive into something that we need to look at on a regular basis with EMS, is this concept of unit hour utilization. Basically what that equates to is how many minutes of every hour are our units running. If you look at FY21 as a whole, we were at 51% or 51% of every hour our units are running. In the last quarter of 21, that number's climbed to 60% of every hour our units are running or on a call, physically on a call. And then they broke it down further from the overall number. The medics themselves went from 50% as an FY21 total up to 62%. And AMBOs are pretty level. They were at 52 and now they're up to 53%. The next two questions get into fleet. We went over this the last time. We have 28 first line units, 4 critical alert units, and we staff up to 4 peaks at a time from 9 to 9 if they're available. And then this is the one metric that we talked about the last time was the EMS fleet, first line out of service. And we had pushed forward that this statistic is generated by Department of General Services and Fleet Maintenance. But I had noted from the email from Sam, from your staff, that they were going to talk about this. Am I correct in that assumption, Mr. Chair, or no?
Yes, we did have some questions around the fleet. Let's see. So we can take a pause here and open up for some questions around staffing, fleet, and otherwise. I've got a few. So my first question is how many seats does the fire department have to fill on each shift in order to work at full capacity on all available medical units?
Well, for available units, you're talking 28 first line units. It takes 2 people to run those units.
Okay.
And then there's 6 EMS officers and a battalion chief. So that'll be 7 additional.
And on average today, how often, what percentage of the time are those seats filled by folks working overtime?
That I'm going to have to defer. I'd have to look that one up. I don't know if one of my colleagues on the call would have that answer. Potentially, but I'd have to look that up, Mr. Chairman, just to be able to give you an accurate answer for that.
In order for us to have an accurate answer, Mr. Chair, we'd have to go back and look at that.
Okay, yeah, that'd be helpful if you guys could just make sure to get that back to the committee after this meeting. That'd be great. And then the other question is, what is the current number of vacancies that the fire department has in the EMS division for the EMTs and paramedics?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to get that. I know we have, is Captain Robinson still online? He's not, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Captain Robinson, do you have that number at your fingertips?
The number of the EMS vacancies?
Yes, sir.
The EMTs, I believe we're right now at 5 or 6, and the paramedics were at 34.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then on average, what percentage of EMS personnel are out on medical leave on a daily basis? Just to give us a sense if you have that on hand.
That certainly is a number we've got to pull because it actually has changed significantly now since we're starting to, we peaked out on Omicron and looks like we're going downhill now. So we'd have to pull those numbers. The number this month would be drastically different from last month as well.
Okay. All right, so we'll wait to hear back from you on that. And then with regard to the vehicles, I know we had a bunch of vehicles that were down. Would DGS be able to speak to us about the maintenance process and where we are with returning vehicles to the street?
Absolutely, sir. We've had a couple of issues. We've had one significant issue with several of the medics, 13 in particular, that were taken out of service because of frame cracks on a particular model. Those are in the process of being repaired. Presently, we have 7 repaired, and we have 6 more that are in progress that will be completed by the end of the month. Additionally, let me just a quick second here. We're still operating 4 units short because of vehicles that the decision was made not to repair. The vehicles, based on their age, it was not fiscally responsible to go ahead and repair those units. And we still have 7 vehicles today that are still in the body shop. Presently, to put it in perspective, when we look at the 29 units that we had down as of, for example, yesterday, 5 were in our shops at Central or our substations, but 24 of those were at vendors. So one of the challenges that we've been running into is being able to make sure that we get the vehicles back from the vendors in a timely basis, especially due to the rise of COVID and the staffing shortages that the vendors are facing.
All right, and so you said 4 we are taking out of service, and the remaining medics we expect to have back in service by the end of this month.
That's correct.
Okay.
Of the frame damage ones, that will be an additional 6 medics that'll be back in service by the end of the month.
Okay, and then net, how much are we down? By the end of the month, what do we expect to be down?
We
actually repaired and taken some out. What are we looking at?
We should be in the 15 vehicle range.
15 vehicles. Okay.
That's what we're anticipating at this point.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions from folks on Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues. The other day we had I joined a hearing that Councilwoman McCray had sponsored about the COVID vaccine and also how to get our folks back to work safely. And the fire department still has the lowest vaccination rate. And I'm wondering what the plan is to get that up. Because that also obviously affects how many people we have on the street.
Yes, ma'am. Councilwoman Ramos, we've met with our members. We've sent out information to encourage them. We've met with labor leadership to continue to encourage them to be vaccinated. The mayor led the charge on encouraging, including actually putting money on the table to move people forward to get vaccinated. So we're hoping that helps us turn the corner.
So the last number we saw was about 69%. Do you anticipating getting that to at least 75%?
I'd hesitate to give you a number. I hope it is. You know, unfortunately, we're dealing with some of the same challenges everybody else is dealing with, trying to encourage people to get vaccinated, dealing with misinformation and other things. But we're trying to articulate as much as we can to our members how important it is for them to get vaccinated. We were literally devastated through the month of December based upon people that were hit with COVID, and we need them to get vaccinated. So we're leading the charge, and we'll continuously. I'm literally going station to station and visiting. Now I'm not just talking about COVID. I'm talking about other things, but that's one of the high points I'm hitting as I go literally station to station.
Thank you. And how many people were we down in December?
I know for a while there we were running anywhere from 100 to 140 people off a day sick. Now, granted, I think as far as
what is that percentage wise?
Percentage wise, as far as staffing for the apparatuses for a daily shift, we need around 300 people, 302. In fact, Chief Matz just sent me the number to add clarity to it. 302 people. So that tells you we were around a third to a half of people who would have been sitting in seats. And we can't give all those to COVID, but certainly we can give a significant number to the COVID.
So the 302, that's when it's fully staffed with everything. So some of this is vacancies as well, or you're just talking about the 140 were just down on sickness or vacation or whatever?
No, ma'am, I'm speaking specifically 100 to 100 some odd people calling out sick.
Yeah, that's devastating actually and potentially somebody could have lost their life not only with COVID, but God forbid a fire. So I mean, I hope that we can work with you on that. The other question, if I may, Mr. Chair, Chief Ford, can you I'm still learning, so I don't know how exactly to put this, but how do the shifts work? I mean, there's 12-hour shifts, 9 to 9, and then 9 to whatever, and there's peak hours and non-peak hours. Are we able to balance and make sure that if we're fully staffed that we've got, or maybe because we're not fully staffed yet, and take COVID away, but just in general because we don't have as many people, what would that look like? I mean, if our peak hours are 9 to 9 during the day, how many EMS do we need? versus, other times. I would think nighttime is also a big deal. So I'm just trying to get a sense of the staffing issue. And then I have a hospitals question, but if you may have talked about this earlier, and I'm sorry if I missed it.
That's okay. Is in particular Chief Surveillance, and I'm calling him because he was over operations. I don't know if he's on the line, but Chief Surveillance, if you're on the line, you can chime in, but I'll start holding the conversation.
Here.
Okay. Can you articulate a response to Councilwoman's question?
Yeah. So I know Councilwoman Ramos. Thank you. You sat in on the presentation I made about our attendance and the issues that we've been dealing with on a regular basis. So basically the way it works is our suppression units work a 24-hour shift, 0700 to 0700 the following day. They work a 24-hour shift. They're off for 24, work another 24, and then they have 5 days off. Our EMS, they work two 10-hour days, two 14-hour nights, and then they're off 4. So suppression and EMS work.
I remember this conversation now. You'll have to excuse me. I'm sorry.
Gotcha. So
keep going.
Yeah. So and when we have to backfill in EMS due to the shortages with sick or whatever, vacation is a big one. A lot of times, if we don't have the EMS people that have signed up for overtime or callbacks, we have to actually move people from suppression over into EMS to backfill those positions. So with the sick leave that we had been averaging, somewhere in the 50 to 60 range, and then actually once we got through the holidays, we were averaging actually a lot more than that. We were up above 70, 75 people. A perfect example, when you asked about the COVID, on the 23rd, or no, I'm sorry, New Year's Eve, there were 128 of our members were off duty sick that could have been working that day. So I backtracked with our infection control officer. So I didn't know the names because only they're supposed to have the names of those that have tested positive. He ran the reports. Out of those 128 people that were off that day, it was 40, I believe it was 43 of them were off as COVID positive. And then there were another 10 to 12 that had gone to Mercy or to PSI with COVID-like symptoms. So out of that 128, 50 of them were COVID-related type issues. So that still leaves us close to 70 people that were off duty sick. So yes, COVID has boosted up those numbers, but that's not the single issue with that. They've gone high, but we're still running anywhere between 50 to 60 a day going off duty sick.
And so this number that's on your website as of 119 today, there's 729 people that have tested positive in the fire department. But that's cumulative. I got that. But it sounds like with that number of people and then the 120 during the holidays or whatever it was, that people are testing positive multiple times.
Yeah, and just so you know too, and the chief didn't mention it, we did hold a COVID vaccination clinic for all of our members. They could come while they were on duty or off duty. It was about a six-day event where we had they could come in, they could get a first dose, second dose, or booster dose for that period. They didn't have to be on duty. If they were off duty and they wanted to come in, so we have made a very concerted effort to try to get our people vaccinated. But it's just like with everything else that's going on, some people are just unwilling to do it.
But it seems to me like with, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, can I continue? It seems to me that there's got to be some other COVID safety happening because with multiple people getting sick multiple times, the 729 number is pretty substantial. And thank you, by the way, for being transparent about it. I do appreciate that. And maybe this is a conversation for a different day that we can have offline, but it seems to me like we've got to do something. And granted, people might be getting sick from their surroundings and not from each other, but they also could be getting sick from each other. So I want to make sure that we've got those protocols in place. Everybody's got the proper mask, that kind of thing.
We have several policies and procedures in place as far as masking as far as particular N95s. The KN95s that the public uses, we actually use N95s, which are specially fitted for our members. They use them on all patient-related calls, all patient contact, regardless of whether it's a possible COVID patient or not. Any patient contact we have very strict policies and procedures in place. Our infection control officers work very hard when, right now I'm not in operations anymore, but when I was in operations, we worked hand in hand to put together policies and procedures to make sure that our members were protected to the fullest with what we were able to give them. So we are well above what the CDC recommends.
Yeah, I'd like to add a last point to this. We actually went to our members using KN95s around the station probably only 3 or 4 months after the onset of COVID, because we realized that we needed that level of protection because our folks literally live together. So and we started establishing, and Dr. Ben was involved. All of us did it. We started doing videos trying to educate our members on how to keep themselves safe and even to encourage them to get vaccinated. So we've done a full court press to it. Not saying we can't do more. We're going to continue to do more, but we do have challenges in that area.
Thanks. I appreciate that. That's it for now, Mr. Chair. I've taken up enough time for now. I have other questions that we can go on later. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos. I just want to appreciate you for asking all those questions around COVID, because I know that's something that I reached out to the chief during the holidays, and we were severely short-staffed. I had a fire in my district. It has affected our response. Just making sure that we continue to be prepared as best as possible on the fire side and the EMS side. We know we're not out of this. We're going to see another spike, who knows when, but continuing to make sure that folks are vaccinated and using the proper precautions is really, really key, especially for first line folks who are interacting with folks every day. So with that, any other questions from the committee before we move forward? Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So two things. One, and I probably need a little bit more time to sort of figure this out or how to really frame it. But so obviously looking at the average response time of, I guess, 10 minutes or so for EMS calls, I'd be interested in a little bit more like what some of the outliers are in that. Obviously, anecdotes are just that, but I had a family member that was involved in a vehicle accident. The fire apparatus arrived pretty quickly, but it took EMS over 45 minutes to arrive. This person's elderly, and ended up in a situation where the firefighters helped load them into another family member's car to get them to the hospital, given the length of time it was taken for that response. Again, I know it's an outlier situation that would not be indicative of every single call, and I'm not trying to frame it in that way. But I would be interested to know what circumstances would lead to something like a 45-minute response time as an outlier on that.
Yeah, and Chief Matz, I'm going to start into this, and I know that later on in your presentation you're going to address this specific issue. But Councilman Burnett, we certainly have a system set up that the initial responders are normally the fire units, and they get there and they're EMS trained. They can stabilize the patient. The challenges that we've had is for a long time, and Omicron and COVID has certainly exacerbated this problem. For a long time, we've been overwhelmed with low acuity 911 calls where we didn't have the resources to maintain that and maintain the ambulances for the high level calls, the calls that really needed rapid response. So COVID actually further just exacerbated that situation. And I wouldn't say that it just happened for us. I would argue it happened for every other municipality throughout the country and the hospitals as well. The end result is the continuum of care of us taking people to the hospital. And that's one of the things I think Chief Matz is going to address as well later on into this process, because there's a larger system that we're a part of, not just us having available ambulances based on call volume, but there's a process of us not having available ambulances because the hospital is backed up as well. So that's part of what Chief Matz and Dr. Ben are going to speak about as well.
Okay. All right. So I'll wait for that. I did, in the line of questioning that Councilmember Ramos brought up around COVID vaccination rates, what are the testing protocols for folks that are unvaccinated? Is it in alignment with the rest of the city? Are there carve-outs? Can you speak to that a little bit around for the folks that are unvaccinated? How much testing are they undergoing on a weekly basis?
Chief Svale, I know you were involved in that. Our members are tested weekly, Councilman. They're scheduled on a particular pathway, whether it's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday through Friday. When they're scheduled to come in, they come in on duty, go and they have their testing, and then they go back in service. We're notified roughly, it's within 12 hours or so, I guess we get the results. They go through to our infection control office, and then we accordingly handle our personnel. There is a lot of, asymptomatic positives that come through. That's one of the other problems with the increased testing. You're going to have the increases on the asymptomatic positive patients, or the patients that are like the day before they really start feeling bad, and they're in work, at work. And once we're notified of them, they follow the prescribed procedures where they go off duty, report to the patient safety infirmary, and then follow whatever the normal guidance is through the CDC as well as our local health department for those people. Did that kind of answer what you were looking for, sir?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And where are they getting tested? Is it at the station that they're assigned to? Or are they going to another more centralized location?
You've been working on that. Can you follow up on that?
Yes, sir. So we were able to work it out with 5 Medicine, where we have 2 places, Calvert Street and the West Northern Parkway place, for our members to go. They can make an appointment. They still have to go online to make the appointment. Then we get them through as many as we can while they're on duty. We rotate companies through, which is something that we've done in the past for various other training or fit tests for air masks, those type of things, requirements. So they have the abilities to do that. We try to get as many as we can through on duty. And then 5 Medicine has been very cooperative with us to set up those 2 places and time blocks just dedicated for fire and police so that we can get in and get out while we're on duty. Because obviously we need to get in very quickly, and they're very good with it. I went to several of them initially, and we were able to rotate a company through there in probably less than 10 minutes. As long as they already had gone online to register. Now, if they didn't register, that way it'd take a little bit longer. But before they left the firehouse, if they went on the internet and registered on 5 Medicine site, we'd have 4 people in and out of there within 10 minutes. So, and it's 5 days a week. Monday, both places are open for us in the morning, and it's a 2-hour block in the morning, 2-hour block in the afternoon, 5 days a week.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. All right. Without any other questions, we're going to move on and let Chief Matz finish up the rest of his presentation. Chief Matz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we went over this last time, and I don't want to, beat this to death, but I just want to make sure. A lot of people say, why are our low acuity calls so high? Why are our call volumes so high? I just want to remind, and I put a couple of infographics on here. One, to remind everybody that healthcare itself only accounts for about 10% of your overall health. The social determinants of health have a lot to do with that, as well as individual behaviors and genetics. And then I went in depth the last time about the social determinants of health. Really, Dr. Lohner, I'll let you pipe in here. You're the expert on this.
The only thing I would say about this, and I appreciate the council's time, I think it is so important to provide data within context, but this is the environment in which we live, which certainly affects our delivery of care. And I hope what you'll see as we proceed to this presentation is that a lot of these mitigation strategies take this into account, because we have our jurisdiction's problems are not new. However, there are challenges specific to the environment in which we work, and that's shared with many other urban jurisdictions, specifically our undomiciled population, the epidemic of substance use that we actually already looked at. I can tell you there's been a lot of money that has been thrown into this particular situation in terms of primary care, but it's not as simple as that. I can put up all the primary care clinics I want, but unless I have the ability to divert 911 services and transport people to these primary care clinics, it can be very difficult. So this is something where I know that all of you are well versed serving this vulnerable community, and a community that quite frankly is needy, but that is our charge, and that's important. I want to also say that against the background, I think there's no other statistic that is more powerful than this one, is that I also sit on a community of the 50 metropolitan medical directors and international medical directors for EMS. Baltimore City, again, I have to say, is number one in terms of there are 333 calls for 911 for every 1,000 patient population in our city. So that reflects that the social determinants of health, and it is not that everybody is dying of a heart attack, it's that 911 is a safety net, and the safety net is something that is quite strained. So that also frames the background, but I have a couple of slides, which I think, I only have 5, but that will hopefully provide additional context to the data.
Thank you, Dr. Lohner. And as we talked about last time, like Dr. Lohner had alluded to, our population has a lot of comorbidities, and that's what we talked about the last time, about the increased EMS usage as well as ED usage. The solution is a multifaceted approach using any of these population health programs that have a positive impact on the social determinants of health, eventually reduce the call volume with better patient outcomes and improve response times. But the background of this, Dr. Lohner really inserted this and really wanted me to push this in and kind of remind everybody what we're dealing with right now is an exacerbation of something that's been around for years. I've been in this since the 90s. Chief Svale has been in a lot longer than me, Chief Clark. But Ben, weren't you instrumental in writing part of this report back in?
Yes, sir. So for the purpose of perspective, in 2011, I was a co-author on the statement of ED ambulance delay. So what really stresses me, as opposed to the COVID staffing and everything else, is that when we consider this as a new problem. So not only are we looking at the history of emergency medicine and the challenges that have contributed to this, but as Chief Matt said very clearly, COVID has exacerbated what has pre-existed. We have always had ED crowding delays. We have always been playing catch up with ambulance. And if you were to ask me back in 2014, what are some of the challenges? We would have said lack of access to primary care. We have staffing issues. We need to kind of really wrap our heads around 911. My world is the intersection of emergency medicine and public health. I'm EMS trained, I'm an emergency clinician. And so my whole job is trying to deal with access. And I hope you'll see as the presentation unfolds that a lot of these solutions are dynamic. You'll see a lot of similarities that are very intentional between a surge plan, how we deal with the increased demand, and what the 3- and 5-year plan looks like. And those things inform statistics. So I think we have a unique problem. Our emergency departments within Maryland were last in terms of offload time as ranked by CMS. We have a very significant challenge ahead of us, but it is not a challenge that we cannot affect. It is not a challenge that we cannot mitigate. And I, credit to the City Council for looking at some of the root causes of EMS utilization, because that's going to be key to informing both current and future strategies as we go along.
So as I said, the resurgence of COVID-19 and more specifically the Omicron variant has really caused a lot of stress. Dr. Lohner, this is one of his famous slides, but I want to basically be able to illustrate the Maryland EMS system runs on a color code system. Whenever you see yellow or red, that means you're not supposed to go to that emergency department. This is Region 3 where we reside. And that's how bad it is at different times. That's how bad we're having troubles getting in. Honestly, we're going to circumvent this whole, I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, but we're actually just going to bypass, because this color code system is absolutely useless when every hospital in the area is on yellow or red. Yellow just means there's no beds available. Red means there's no cardiac beds available. And that's just a snapshot of how bad the system is. Ben, you want to talk about the performance chart below it?
Just for edification, as I remember, this is all the time, well before the pandemic. It has always been this way.
Yes, and that is well said. And this is what I think we have been trying to, emphasize. The bottom chart is quite interesting. Now, it is so bad that we have never been able to reach. So this is what's called a fractal performance chart, because averages can be sort of taken into account any way you like. And anybody that has had the unfortunate drawing the straw to listen to me talk about this is we talk about transparency of data, but there's also context. So on that bottom graph, the intersection between green and red reflects the percentage of the time that we meet an offload landmark of 40%. So we have never been able to meet that according to a set benchmark. What COVID does is further push that down. So this underscores the challenge, the background of the challenge with which we're operating. And that basically is reflected the month of December. Again, not a new statistics, as you said, Mr. Chairman.
And to be honest, this is what we look at every day when we go to surrounding ERs. I would challenge anybody to take a look, especially at our surrounding hospitals. So surrounding hospitals, the challenge is they not only share most of our ambulances in Baltimore City, but you also have Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Howard interacting, and it's causing huge problems.
Hey, Chief Matz, before you go, I want to add one statement in this because the direction they're going, I want to add a little context for us. Around 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we came to the conclusion we needed to add more ambulances. So we leveraged ALS units to add more BLS units. In fact, increasing our EMS response capabilities by 30%. Thinking that would help us out and improve our response time and give our people a little bit of elbow and breathing room rather. We realized that yes, we probably still need more ambulances, probably, but that's not nearly the majority of the answer. In fact, it's not even close. Yeah, we should have done it back then, but we were under the wrong assumption about what we were going to get out of it. Go ahead, Chief Matz.
So members of the City Council, remember the last presentation? I gave this presentation to the left where I was talking about our average offload, the region, as well as our worst offenders. Just to give you a side-by-side snapshot from October to now, last week our average was at 53 minutes. We're very good because we're very aggressive and we're pushy to get our people out. The regional average went from 58 minutes to 70 minutes. The Region 3, people that took over an hour to get off went from 9% to 13%. In the original presentation, I told you our worst two offenders were at 67 minutes, 90th percentile or 90% of the time offloading, and 55 minutes. That time last week, the worst offender was at 141 minutes. The second was 117 minutes. And just to give you a little more perspective, and we track this, and to be fair, I tried to do apples and apples. This is the 7th through the 14th. The bottom line tells you the total number of hours that we spent lined up in hospital waiting rooms. You know, if you look at like the 13th, we spent 100 hours total accumulated time in the ED. That's equivalent to 100 calls because we average about a call an hour. So it's impossible. What I'm trying to just reflect to you, and these are the same problems that we're going through, the region's going through. It's very difficult to operate an EMS system when you're spending 68 hours on the wall waiting. So you have members that run, and then they're stuck.
This is not a regional problem. This is a national phenomenon.
Yeah,
everybody's dealing with it.
It really is. In Baltimore County, I've heard from my partners in other parts of the city. Not only are we going through the staffing issues, you know, I know we talked briefly about staffing. Washington, D.C. had the equivalent of an entire shift off duty a couple of weeks ago. Baltimore County had over 200 people off. So it's everybody's going through the same problem, but this offload is just getting worse and worse. And what we're trying to do is we actually decided to change our posture per se. And Ben, I'm probably just going to get into this right now. The problem is for a long time, Baltimore City's hospitals have pretty well held us hostage. There's the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. It was brought about, and I think it was 86. Basically, it was the dump. They call it the anti-dump law that came about. What happened for years before 86, if somebody showed up in an emergency room and didn't have valid insurance, they would ship them off or dump them somewhere else. Part of EMTALA is they require a hospital. Any patient that presents to a hospital within so many feet of the ER door, it's their responsibility. When we go into these hospitals, it's reasonable, and Dr. Lawner will speak for the state, but they're looking at a 20 to 40 minute offload as an average and considered a reasonable offload time. When we start getting out of these areas, basically the hospitals are holding us hostage. And basically what I told the hospitals on a regional call recently, I told them that what they're doing is it's disrespectful to our patients, it's disrespectful to our people, and it's disrespectful to the citizens of Baltimore, and that we're going to have to change our posture. And some of those posture changes involve things like, remember I showed you the map of the yellow and the red? Well, we historically have done when it's in critical or like blizzards or bad snow, we go to code blue or modified code blue. That means we take patients to the appropriate hospital, which basically means we have to go to the closest hospital, the closest appropriate hospital. we disregard the color codes. Some of the other things that we're looking at doing, and we're going to just talk about today in terms of dispatch, we're going to promote that our medical duty officer or telephone triage assist with reprioritization of some calls. We're reinforcing, I know early in the pandemic, we did the viral syndrome pandemic triage. And basically that's a set of criteria. When we go to somebody's house, if they check all the boxes and they're low acuity, we basically leave them at home to convalesce at home if they meet the certain criteria. They have to do with certain blood pressures, certain priorities, and if they meet those criteria, they stay home. Dr. Lohner, did you want to talk about the other part of the viral pandemic triage breakdown as it relates to dispatch?
Once we continue, we have a couple slides on that, Chief.
Oh, you want to talk about that a little bit later? Okay. And then some of the other stuff that we're going to endorse, some of our, we're at a crisis standard right now of care. Most of the hospitals around us, and you've probably seen it in the media, where they say, XYZ hospitals going to a crisis standard of care. What that means is the hospitals are saying we're in such of a crisis right now that our normal ratios of like 1 nurse to 4 patients is changed. It could be 1 to 8, 1 to 10 to try to adjust to that. We're in those same crisis standards, like what Councilman Burnett brought up earlier. Part of the procedure that we're going to do is we're going to support if suppression opts to transport a patient low acuity to the hospital. We want to get the patients to the hospital. We're also going to be reinforcing our 30, 60, and 90-minute rule at the hospital. At 30 minutes, our MDO is contacted that our members are staged for a long period of time. At 60 minutes, our EMS officers will respond to that hospital to try to facilitate offload. And at 90 minutes, our battalion chief EMS will show up at that hospital, liberate our units. I think 90 minutes is fair enough. I think 90 minutes is excessive. If I showed you the number of times that we're waiting in excess of an hour, it's crazy. One day alone, I think we had 13 incidences exceeding 2 hours. But basically, BCMS is going to be helping them to transition to a hospital wheelchair or relocate that patient to a waiting room, transition them to a hospital stretcher, transition them to a hospital wheelchair, and transition them potentially to a hospital cot. Baltimore City Fire Department have several hundred cots that are the low to the floor cots that fold up. Basically, we're going to put on each unit. And at a certain threshold and interacting with that hospital, we're going to basically transfer the patient to a cot, notify the staff that the patient is on them, and then leave so that we can answer more responses on the street. The other option that's available to the patient is actually if they want to go to another ER. But the problem is early on when we made the 30, 60, 90 rule, it's easy to say, well, I could take you from west to east. The problem we're having right now is everybody's packed. So it's really kind of out of the wind.
I'm really curious what synchronization of sorts we have between efforts with the health department and community efforts on the front end to address existing conditions that lead to folks relying on the ambulance in order to get to a hospital or emergency services regardless. What efforts, how those things tie together? I'm not asking this question well, so please forgive me. But what coordination is happening between EMS, our emergency departments, and our health department to make sure that as best as possible, we're addressing folks with early intervention, or if we can, instead of bringing folks to hospitals, address those issues in the field and maybe not have to bring them to the hospital, so on and so forth. Are there other options to sort of relieve some of the pressure on our hospitals as well?
Ben, I'm going to go for a second, then I'll let you step in. So the first thing that we're doing, we collaborate with the hospitals every month. We meet with all the area hospitals. We've laid these problems out to the hospitals. They're aware of the problems. Initially, they actually said, well, you're wrong about EMTALA, but honestly, we verified through CMS. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid actually support, and they came out with this a stance on it's called hospital parking, which is people stuck in emergency rooms, and that it's actually considered an EMTALA complaint that can result in fines to the hospitals. But we do try to collaboratively work with the hospitals. When we go to the hospitals, we're not trying to say we're going to walk in the door, dump the patient, and walk out. We're trying to make, a soft handoff at a certain point. But I got to be honest with you, the system's stressed right now. I mean, I'll let Dr. Lohner speak. It can be pretty contentious. We've had instances where our medics will call on the box and say, I have somebody coming in. Hospitals will actually say, please don't bring them here. We've had other hospitals that Dr. Lohner, I can let you interject. It gets a little more confrontational where historically it hasn't been confrontational. And I think it has a lot to do with the COVID, the burnout. Everybody's kind of at their wits' end. You know, Dr. Lohner, you work in that ED. You tell me what it's like for you.
So, Mr. Chair, you had asked also what components are in place to help mitigate this on the front end, and that is an absolutely great question. There are multiple population health programs. There are transitional care programs. This was all under the Affordable Care Act, but quite frankly, these interfaces fail when the call is made to 911, and the 911 system is comparatively underdeveloped, and that's one of the things we'll talk about as we move through this. So there's a lot of stuff on the front end, but once the call is made to 911, that is an emergency response system that really needs to evolve, and that has been that way for quite some time. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those things, and there are proven concepts. We are not lost, but to your point, I mean, I work in that world. I work in an ER where you know, we see 80,000 patients a year. So the hospitals are just not saying, we're going to hold ambulances hostage. The hospitals are overwhelmed because the ED is the point where you can walk in and not have to pay for care. So the emergency departments, I've worked overnight where there are 2 nurses. So the solution can't be, as you said, bring her to the hospital and establish an adversarial relationship with hospitals. There are partners to care, and to that end, we're talking about how we as a fire department can own some of that a little bit more and defer them on the front end, because the 911 pathways that are currently in existence, pretty much when you pick up the phone, it goes to 911. As we talk about how to mitigate some of these statistics that we addressed earlier, we'll talk about some problems that will not only, or some strategies that will not only affect us right now, but I think really position us for success in the future. And that's, I think, downstream in the presentation, Chief. So we've also, so this is in our 3 to 5 year plan. We talked about the cycle of an EMS call. I just wanted to reiterate that we have a couple of phases in which we can impact 911. So mitigation is kind of before the call, like you're talking about what happens at dispatch response, and then what happens when we actually transport. So I just want to put that up there for transparency. You know, and I hope that when we talk about EMS plans, it does not benefit me to in any way massage the data to make it look better. I think we have to understand the crisis is here. It has been here. And as you mentioned, we will likely deal with COVID or something else during the next time. So our EMS plan, as we build the infrastructure, and our response to this is evidence-based, scalable, and flexible. So when we talk about different components and we have the ability to measure it, we'll be able to answer your question with a lot of granularity to say, of the calls that are low acuity, which one of them can we intercept? Which one of those can we redirect? So, and that begins with a couple of things. So number one is mitigation, and this is where we have a significant opportunity. So in collaboration with public health, with the health department, with MIMS, and I know Chief Ford has embraced this as well, we have to educate. Now, I am never in a position, I never want to tell people don't call 911, but I want to say call 911 for what is appropriate. And that is something which is a change in messaging, because before, 911 used to be the place where we could sort all this out. And I think it's fair to say that regardless of all of our orientation and data, 911 system is quite overwhelmed. So can we engage in messaging to talk about what 911 is most well suited for? And I think we're seeing this now with behavioral health diversion, with 211, 311. We need to do a better job of messaging. In other words, avoid the disconnect between, yes, we're going to be there 24 hours, but we also cannot be there 24 hours in a timely way. To your point, Commissioner Burnett, that if Councilman Burnett, if we don't have the ambulances to send because people are waiting and they're held up at hospitals, we really need to take a healthy pause when that ambulance is requested. There have been jurisdictions that have been very hard on this messaging. Some jurisdictions across the country have said, we're just not sending. I think the message should be from us that we are never going to deny people help. But what we can do, and what we can certainly do a better job of, is give them the help that they need. So if you're calling because you need a ride to the hospital, if you're calling because you have no other ride to the hospital, that's where we need to leverage existing resources, collaborate more with the health department to essentially meet the problem where it lies. So mitigation strategies are a big part, and that is not only in this surge plan, but also our 3 to 5 year plan. Now, what happens now, and this is the state of the fire department that has been, this is the state of many fire departments. So you call 911, it goes to 911 communications, jointly operated by fire, police, and then once it gets to fire dispatch, we send either an ambulance, and quite, I would say, I don't know, you know, the peak time data would say 9 to 9, but very frequently in the morning, we start off with no medic available. That is not an unusual occurrence. So fire suppression will be sent in order to meet that need. And I think we can appreciate that if we continue to drive this paradigm to the right, which is the existing paradigm for dispatch, we're going to run out of ambulances, and then we're going to be in the situation where it's difficult because we're all staying there. Now we do have a lot of resources that are designed to pay some attention to this. We have a limited nurse triage plan and paramedic triage plan where our paramedics will be able to answer calls, but the majority of data from that program, which costs several $1,000s a day, we put a paramedic in there, and this data has been replicated across countless jurisdictions. If the person says, well, I feel sick and I still want to go, we send them to the hospital. And the only way we have to get them there is by ambulance. So we have also behavioral health, a couple of other things. I think in order to wrap ourselves and our heads around this program a little bit more efficiently, we have to build upon what other urban jurisdictions with similar resource problems have done. That is to say, we position the clinicians in the front. So number one, you inform dispatch, as opposed to calling in and then we say, okay, we go through we go through the high acuity questions. Do you have chest pain, shortness of breath? Is there a stroke, bleeding, whatever else? If the answer to that is no, you take a pause and you provide dispatch as a method of healthcare delivery. We ascertain what the need of the community is, if it is a behavioral health response team, if it is a ride to the doctor's office, and most importantly, and this has been proven in DC, you connect that caller to the resources they need. So if you have a nurse triage line, which has health information exchange, which has transport capability, which has connections to the federally qualified healthcare centers, we can say not only we're not going to send you an ambulance, but we have an appointment that is scheduled for you at this date, at this time, and we transport. The challenge is those protocols take a lot of medical supervision, they take staff, they take infrastructure, and that is something the fire department, granted, we're all here for all hazards emergency response. One option is to say we're not going to do that. I think all of us, under Chief Ford's leadership realizes that that is not what we can do in 2022, right? We have to say this is an added challenge, and just like we respond to all hazards, we will also build in the mechanism so that when we identify these low acuity calls, we have the ability to put patients in the specific boxes to get them the care they need and connect them to valuable resources. So the rest of the plan just talks about that. I know that we've spent quite a bit in talking about what a 911 and a responsive system looks like. The data coming out from DC would suggest that in the first year, they have a very similar response system. In the first year of their nurse triage line, they were able to successfully divert 7,000 EMS calls. And that was in the first year of the inception from that program. And as they do that, they learn more about not only the social determinants of health, but what they need to do in order to resource that appropriately. Because I think the current system is very challenged if you just have a non-medical person trying to classify low to no acuity calls. It's very difficult to tell, so we want to put eyes on the patient, we send resources. I think we really need to transition to a sustainable model where we attempt to get a little bit more detail about what's going on. And that means changing expectations back to the mitigation piece, meaning that when you call 911, you may not get an ambulance, you may get a nurse, you may get an Uber or Lyft ride to the hospital. So I think this is something that is evidence-based, patient-focused, as we mentioned. The last part, and I put that there last to be purposefully, is that I think if you look at jurisdictions of similar size, for example, Detroit, DC, St. Louis, given our utilization rate, which I know Chief Matt said was a UHU of up to 60%, that is also not sustainable. So at some point, we need to pull that panic button and have a relief valve where, just like if you had a major disaster and we have critical units that would be staffed by, let's say, non-traditional EMS providers, there is a certain component where we need to have an additional service or the ability to deploy additional trucks on the road. I hesitate from saying that as a solution, but again, the system also needs to have the ability to respond to the increased need that we have demonstrated time and time again. So I certainly don't want to belabor that point, but in my world where I deal with the interface between the patients that need care, the fire department that needs to provide the care, and the ED that is tasked with providing the definitive care, I think we've shown a couple of situations in which we can deal with the statistics and mitigate them a little bit more effectively. So we may not be able to prevent all the 911 calls that come in from the top 5 neighborhoods, but when they come in, I'm hoping we'll be able to serve the patient population and the caller population in a little bit more of an informed manner by getting them the resources they need.
Dr. Lawner, if I could piggyback behind you too, just on this bottom line. Early in the pandemic in 2020, we were kind of innovative and we reached out and put on some commercial surge units to give us a little more capability. I just want to let you know we're actively doing that again to be able to give us a little bit of that relief valve that Dr. Lawner was just discussing here. And then the last slide. was the alternate transport, and that's what Dr. Larner had talked about. Of course, we have ALS units, BLS units, multi-passenger vans, wheelchair vans, Uber, Lyft, or taxi is also an option. Mr. Chair, I just left the 2 recruitment slides in here. I don't know if you want these as standing slides or you want, because we're in continuous with that right now. Do you want these, quarter to quarter, or you just may drop them out unless it's relevant?
I think we have a separate LO to discuss recruitment, so
Okay.
I think we can skip over the recruitment piece. And I really want to thank you guys for putting the time in to think about all these different pieces. I'm going to open the floor to questions from the committee. I've got two very simple ones, and I'm sure we can answer these very quickly. In our last meeting, I asked about CityStat, and if we were using metrics from CityStat, what CityStat metrics we were using. At the time, we weren't using anything from CityStat, or you guys said you were going to look to find what metrics we were using in the past. Were you able to get that information?
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say most of the metrics that we really reported on historically were, I mean, we can report and give you the call volume because it's going to tell you we're a really busy system. I think we need to look more granular. Some of the things that Dr. Lawner's talking about. How are we doing with offload? We've read the facets report that said if I have our offload to 30 minutes, it's equivalent to 6 more units. We've got to start making some moves in those directions. The hospitals are finally starting to accept the fact that we control the narrative on the units. And trust me, it was not an easy. I'm not getting any Christmas cards at the hospitals right now. I can't tell you a lie, but they kind of accepted it. We're trying to work hand in hand with them. We admitted that we're not just coming in and just, arbitrarily dropping people, but that there has to be an answer for us to be able to answer. Our mission is to the citizens of Baltimore, not to augment the hospital's shortness in staff and personnel. So I would say yes on that. I could pull them out, but honestly, most of the numbers were driven around numbers, to be honest with you, Mr. Chair.
I think the metrics focused around 3 major things. One thing was call volume. Another thing was response time. And I think the last was turnaround time in the hospital. I would argue just like anything else, I think, not saying those are unimportant. I think we should evolve and look at other things because there needs to be a focus on population health and getting ahead of the call in the first place. And that's what Dr. Ben, and I will add, I'm going to go to a different component on this, Mr. Chair. We meet every week to talk about our metrics and talk about how to improve what we're doing and how to get the word out, not just to the community, but also to our members, because they need to be encouraged to know that we're paying attention to this and we're trying to resolve it. But one of the things Dr. Ben continuously brings us back around to, because he has a 360-degree view of what's going on, he said, we can't just raise Cain with the hospitals without coming up with our end of the solutions, because we are part of the problem. So that's part of what we're working on, population health. We're looking at the historical responses. When you pick up the phone and call 911, you get an ambulance. Well, that may not be so in the future. In fact, I would argue it's not going to be so in the future in Baltimore. We've got to reinvent ourselves. We do not have a choice. We're, for lack of a better word, we're broken and we have to change. We have to change. In this situation, like I said, we increased ambulances by 30%, and we are actually in a worse situation now than we were in there then. So increasing just ambulance is not the answer. We are looking at a holistic view, and we've developed a 5-year plan. But I want to add context to that as well. We created a 5-year plan in the department before, and within 2 years we had to navigate away from it because circumstances and everything changed so much. So whatever we put in place, it has to be a living document where we continuously evaluate whether or not we're getting what we want to get, or if the dynamics have shifted beneath us and we're still running with the same plan. In other words, there's a new memo out and we hadn't read it and adjusted to it. So that's the last portion I'd like to add to this. We've got to belly up to the bar, and we have to be a part of this solution.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Ford. I appreciate that. I think I'm really glad to hear, and you mentioned this before, you guys are meeting weekly. I think that's a really important step. I think it's also really important to continue to think about the metrics that give us a sense for the health of our operations. So I still think whether or not we want to focus on these metrics or other metrics are more suited for what we're trying to accomplish as a department or as an EMS service. I think, it's totally up to the experts, you guys. I do think it is helpful, one, for us to kind of keep our eye on the prize. And if that needs to change, the prize needs to change. I'm with you on that, whatever that may mean. We're so totally willing to figure out what that is. But it also helps keep us, the council, apprised of what you're focused on so that we can be talking about the same issue the same way for the same reasons. Clearly, you guys have really, really done a lot of work to understand some of the problems that lead to where we are today. And I think that's an important first step. But as you know, ideas don't mean anything unless you have the follow through. And so making sure that we can continually take the insights that Dr. Launer has alluded to and figure out plans that help us systematically address these issues over time, both within our own system and also with the hospitals and also upstream, as I alluded to with the health department and the way that we roll out various resources in our neighborhoods, in our top 10 neighborhoods, which we touched on. One of the things from the presentation that completely shocked me was when we were going through the top 10 box areas, the difference between the neighborhood with the most calls and the neighborhood with the second most calls was to a factor of 10 in many instances. So these are hyper focused issues that we know are happening in the same areas quarter after quarter, year in, year out. And so I think, one, having those weekly meetings is very important. Two, having a sense for how these metrics are impacting our operations, whether it's the 3 call volume, response time, and hospital time, or others, I think are important. But just I do think we want to make sure that we're continuing to leverage data in our decision making, because as you alluded to, it's changing every day, especially with COVID. We don't know what's around the corner. So really appreciate you guys once again. I found this really, really helpful, and I hope the council, the committee did as well. Any other questions from the committee? Hold on one second. I can't see anybody. Any other questions from the committee? All right, seeing no further questions, we're going to go into recess. And I once again want to thank you, Chief Ford, Chief Matz, Dr. Launer, just for giving us a lot of insight and clearly putting a lot of time into figuring this out. I look forward to our next meeting next quarter. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Council, for your time. Much appreciated.